The first time I noticed him, truly noticed him, was on a Tuesday. Rain lashed against the classroom windows, turning the world outside into a watercolor blur. I was 38, a woman carved from composure and career, my life a series of neatly checked boxes. He was 21, a silhouette of potential and quiet intensity in the third row. His name was Leo, and he was my student. It wasn't his looks, not at first. It was the way he listened. While the other students scribbled notes or glanced at the clock, Leo simply absorbed. His gaze was a physical weight, a steady, unnerving pressure in a room full of drifting attention. He was studying me more than he was studying 20th century literature. "Ms. Thorne," he'd say after class, a book held loosely in his long-fingered hands. His voice was deeper than it had any right to be, a low vibration that hummed in the space between us. "The Sylvia Plath passage. You said her isolation was a choice, a defiant one. Do you believe that?" He didn't ask to challenge me. He asked because he genuinely wanted to know the architecture of my mind. And I, a woman who had built her life on being unknowable, found myself wanting to show him the blueprints. "I believe," I said, my tone carefully curated, a lecture hall cadence, "that some silences are not empty. They are full of answers." His eyes, the color of a storm-churned sea, held mine. The air in my office grew thick, charged with the scent of old books and the rain on our coats. The space between us, the 5 feet of worn carpet, felt alive. It trembled with everything we did not say. That was the beginning of the unraveling. 1,000 tiny moments, each a frayed thread. A brush of fingers as I handed back his paper. A spark so sharp I felt it in the roots of my teeth. The pause before he spoke. A silence that felt heavier, more meaningful than any word. The day he stayed behind to help me rearrange the heavy bookshelves, the heat of his body a brand through my silk blouse as we passed in the narrow aisle. I could feel the ghost of his breath on my neck. "You're different outside of class," he murmured, his voice close to my ear. I turned, my professional mask firmly in place, my heart a wild thing beating against my ribs. "And how would you know that, Mr. Evans? You only see me in class." A faint, knowing smile touched his lips. "I see you," he said simply, and I knew he did. He saw the woman beneath the tailored blazers, the one who was tired of being a monument and secretly longed to be a ruin. I was the master of restraint. I was the one who set the boundaries, who held the door to my inner world firmly shut. I told myself it was a harmless intellectual fascination, a teacher's pride in a brilliant student. I was lying. The moment I knew it was no longer harmless came on the last day of the semester. The final papers were submitted. The classroom was empty, echoing with the ghosts of concluded discussions. He stood before my desk, the last student to leave. The dynamic had shifted. He was no longer my student, not technically. The professional framework that had held us at a careful distance was gone. "So this is it," he said. His hands were shoved into the pockets of his jeans, his shoulders tense. "This is it," I echoed, my voice unnaturally soft. I busied myself with stacking papers, a futile attempt at normality. "You did exceptional work this semester, Leo." Is that all this was? A semester? The question hung in the air, stark and dangerous. I finally looked up and met his gaze. The raw, unguarded hunger in his eyes stole the breath from my lungs. It wasn't the look of a boy with a crush. It was the look of a man who had seen a reflection of his own soul and was determined to claim it. He took a step closer. The desk was the only thing separating us now. I could see the faint pulse at the base of his throat, the determined set of his jaw. The air crackled. "Ms. Thorne," he began, his voice low. "Ilara," I whispered, the name a surrender I hadn't meant to give. He stilled. The sound of my name on his lips, though unspoken, seemed to hang between us. I saw the battle in his eyes, deference warring with desire. I should have ended it. I should have gathered my things, offered a polite goodbye, and walked away. That's what the composed, controlled version of me would have done. Instead, I stood my ground. My heart hammered against my sternum, a frantic bird in a gilded cage. The space between us was no longer just air. It was a living entity, thick with the heat of our shared glances, the memory of our charged conversations, the scent of his cologne, clean and sharp, like ozone after a storm. He leaned forward just slightly, his knuckles resting on the polished wood of my desk. His eyes dropped to my mouth for a fleeting, incendiary second. "You feel this," he stated, his voice barely a whisper. It wasn't a question. It was a confession, an accusation. And in that suspended moment, with the rain beginning to fall again outside, I knew he could see right through the fortress I had built around myself. He could see the wanting, the desperate, thrilling, terrifying wanting that I had spent a lifetime suppressing. The professional was gone. The woman remained, and she was terrified, and she was alive. I didn't answer him. I didn't have to. The sharp, shaky intake of my breath was answer enough. The carefully constructed world of right and wrong, appropriate and forbidden, dissolved into the charged silence between us. This was no longer harmless. This was the edge of a cliff, and we were both about to fall. For a week I hid. I buried myself in grading the final papers. The red ink a stark reminder of the lines I could not cross. I told myself it was a moment of madness. A fleeting crack in my foundation brought on by the strange intimacy of a classroom and the intensity of a bright young mind. I was a rational woman. I would be rational again. But rationality is a poor shield against a memory that breathes. I could still feel the phantom heat of his body across my desk, the storm-gray intensity of his eyes, the way my name had hovered, unspoken but felt, in the air between us. Ilara. His paper was the last one I graded. It was on the themes of desire and damnation in Wuthering Heights. His prose was incendiary. He wrote not as a student analyzing a text, but as a soul who understood the brutal, beautiful truth of a love that consumes everything in its path. Catherine and Heathcliff, that he had written, did not fall in love. They recognized each other. It was a homecoming to a place they had never been, and a ruin of every other place they would ever try to inhabit. My hands trembled holding the pages. This wasn't an essay. It was a manifesto, a love letter, a challenge. The email arrived an hour later. Its subject line was innocuous. Question about my grade. The body was a single devastating sentence. I can't forget. 3 words. They unraveled a week of resolve in a single silent scream. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking like a frantic heartbeat. Every professional instinct screamed at me to delete it, to send a sterile, distancing reply. To run. I closed my laptop. I poured a glass of wine. I drank it standing by the window, watching the city lights blur. I can't forget, neither could I. We began to meet in the spaces between. The neutral territories, a public garden at dusk, a nearly empty art gallery, a coffee shop on the wrong side of town where no one knew us. It was a slow, torturous dance of proximity. We were 2 magnets, resisting the pull, circling the inevitable. Our conversations became confessions spoken in code. "You're so sure of yourself," he said one afternoon in the garden. The setting sun caught the gold in his hair. We were sitting on a bench, a careful foot of space between us. In class, you commanded the room. You never seemed to have any doubts. I watched a leaf drift from an oak tree, its descent a slow spiral. Certainty is a performance, Leo. The best teachers are just the best actors. And what about now? His voice was soft, his gaze a physical touch on my profile. Are you acting now? I turned to look at him. The last of the sun gilded his features, making him look both young and ancient. My mask felt thin, brittle. I don't know who I am when I'm with you, I admitted. The truth torn from a place I had kept locked for years. A small, slow smile touched his lips. It wasn't triumphant. It was reverent. Good. The touches began to linger. A brush of his hand against mine as I passed him a coffee cup. The fleeting pressure of his palm on the small of my back as he guided me through a door. Each point of contact was a brand, a small secret fire that left me aching and unsettled. My body, which I had treated as a functional, well-dressed vessel for my mind, was suddenly a symphony of nerve endings, all playing a song only he seemed to know. The tension was a living thing. It was in the way his eyes would drop to my mouth when I spoke, the way he'd lean in just a little too close to hear me over the ambient noise, the way the air would still and thicken around us, until the only sound was the shared rhythm of our breathing. One evening, it rained again. We were the last ones in the gallery, standing before a massive abstract painting, all swirling dark blues and a single slashing streak of gold. It's chaos, I murmured, hugging my coat around me. It's a moment before the calm, he corrected, his voice low. He was standing close behind me, not touching, but I could feel the heat of him along my back. The gold isn't being consumed by the blue. It's holding its ground. It's the eye of the storm, I shivered. The metaphor was too apt, too painful. This is impossible, Leo, I whispered, my confession lost in the vast, quiet room. He didn't move. Why? You know why? The world. My career. Your life. It's just beginning. My life began, he said, his voice dropping to a husky whisper right by my ear. The day I walked into your classroom and saw you, a queen in a kingdom of apathy, and you looked at me, and for a second you weren't a queen. You were just a woman, a lonely one. The word struck me with the force of a physical blow. Lonely. It was the truth I had never allowed myself to name. I was surrounded by people, respected by peers, but I was a fortress, and fortresses are, by their very nature, empty. I turned to face him. The space between us was negligible. I could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, the faint tremor in his jaw. My control, my precious, hard-won control, was shattering. I was drowning in the want, in the terrifying, glorious vulnerability. Tell me to leave, he breathed, his gaze burning into mine. Tell me to forget again. And I will. I'll walk away and you'll never see me again. Just say the words, my lips parted. The command was there, poised on my tongue. Leave. Forget. The safe words, the sane words. They wouldn't come. A single traitorous tear escaped, tracing a hot path down my cheek. I, who never cried, was undone by a boy. A man, he saw it. His own resolve seemed to fracture. He lifted a hand, his movements agonizingly slow, giving me every chance to pull away. His thumb, warm and slightly rough, caught the tear, smearing it away. The touch was so gentle, so unbearably intimate, that a sob caught in my throat. His hand cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheekbone. His eyes searched mine, asking 1,000 questions, and I surrendered. My head gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. The last fortress wall crumbled into dust. He didn't kiss me. Not then. He simply rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed, his breath mingling with mine in the silent, sacred space between our bodies. We stood like that for a long time, two shipwrecked souls finally reaching shore, the rain painting silent streaks down the gallery windows. The dominance I had worn like armor, the control I had wielded like a weapon, it was gone. In its place was a terrifying, exhilarating vulnerability. I had spent a lifetime building walls, and he had simply waited, patiently, for me to realize I was the one trapped inside them. The world, as I had known it, ended in that quiet gallery. What began was something new, fragile, and fiercely, terrifyingly real. For a few weeks, we lived in a bubble. We met in my apartment, a space that had always felt like a showroom but now felt like a sanctuary. The air was different, charged with the soft sounds of his laughter, the scent of his skin on my sheets, the profound quiet of our bodies simply existing together in the aftermath. He learned the landscape of my silence, and I learned the poetry of his. He'd trace the faint lines beside my eyes and call them the history of my thoughts. I'd watch the way his hand, so capable and sure, moved when he talked about his dreams, and I'd feel a hope so sharp it was almost a pain. But bubbles are meant to pop. The reckoning came on a Tuesday, just as it had begun. An email from the university's ethics committee, a single forwarded message from an anonymous account, a grainy photo of us leaving the gallery, his hand on the small of my back, my face tilted toward his, illuminated in a way that left no doubt. The subject line was one word: concern. The floor fell away. The cold, professional language of the email was a bucket of ice water, shocking me back into the world of rules and consequences. My career, my reputation, the life I had built with such meticulous care, it was all poised to crumble. Guilt, a cold and heavy stone, settled in my stomach. I had been selfish. I had risked everything for a feeling, and I had risked his future. He was just starting. A scandal like this could follow him, a shadow he'd never outrun. That night, when he came to me, I was standing by the window, the printed email clutched in my hand. The silence in the room was no longer peaceful. It was brittle. "Alara?" he said, his voice laced with concern. I turned and held out the paper. I watched his face as he read it, saw the flicker of anger, then a grim resolve. He didn't look surprised. He looked, "Ready, they can't touch you," he said, his voice low and firm. He crumpled the paper in his fist. "I was never your student when this started. Not in the way that matters. I'll tell them that. I'll tell everyone that." "It doesn't matter what's technically true," I said, my voice hollow. The controlled woman was back, but she was a ghost, going through the motions. "It matters what it looks like. It matters that I was in a position of power. I should have known better. I did know better." He crossed the room in 3 long strides, taking my face in his hands. "Look at me. This is what matters." "Do you love me?" The question was a direct hit. I tried to look away, but he held me fast. My eyes filled with tears. "Leo, do you love me?" he repeated, his gaze unwavering, a steady lighthouse in my churning sea of fear. A sob broke from my lips. "Yes." The word was a ragged whisper, a final, total surrender. "God, yes. And that's why I'm so terrified. I can't be the ruin of you." "You're not my ruin, Alara," he said, his thumb stroking my cheek. "You're my foundation. Let them talk. Let them have their concerns. I choose you. Now you have to choose. Do you choose the life they think you should have? Or do you choose the life you actually want?" With me, the hearing was a sterile, terrifying affair, a board of grim-faced colleagues, the air smelling of antiseptic and judgment. I sat alone at a long table, my hands folded, my posture perfect. I was prepared to fall on my sword, to absolve him of all blame, to paint myself as the predatory professor, to let my career be the sacrifice that saved his. But then the door opened, and he walked in. He hadn't been summoned. He had come anyway. He didn't look at me. He addressed the board, his voice clear and resonant, devoid of the boy I'd met in the 3rd row. He was a man. "The responsibility is mine," he stated, and my heart stopped. I pursued her. I challenged the boundary long after the semester ended. The power dynamic you're so concerned about was irrelevant the moment she saw me not as a student, but as a man who loved her. And if your definition of ethics means punishing a woman for finally allowing herself to be loved, then your ethics are worthless. The room was stunned into silence. He had taken my planned sacrifice and set it on fire. He had stood before them not as a victim, but as my protector, my equal. In that moment, the last of my fear burned away, leaving only a clear, bright certainty. I stood. My voice, when it came, was steady. "He's right," I said, looking not at the board but at Leo. "The technicalities are yours, but the truth is ours. I love this man, and I will not apologize for it anymore." We walked out of that room together, hand in hand. There were no triumphant cheers. There were consequences, a formal reprimand in my file, whispers that would follow us for a time. But we wore them like old scars, proof that we had survived. I had spent my life running from the part of me that wanted, that felt, that hoped. I had built a fortress of control to keep the messiness of desire at bay, but love isn't tidy. It isn't safe. It's a reckoning that demands your whole self. I learned to let go, to stop being just a queen and finally allow myself to be a woman who was chosen, and who had chosen in return. The sunlight is different now, softer. It filters through the leaves of the old oak in our backyard, dappling the pages of my book. I don't teach anymore. I write. The words that were once locked in academic journals now flow freely, stories of love and courage I never knew I had in me. I hear the screen door slide open and close. I don't look up, but a smile touches my lips. I feel him before I see him, his presence a familiar, steady warmth. Leo sets a cup of tea on the table beside me, his hand lingering on my shoulder. His touch is no longer a shock of lightning, but a deep, resonant hum, the grounding wire to my soul. He presses a kiss to the top of my head, his lips lingering in my hair. "The publisher called," he says, his voice warm with pride. "They love the new manuscript." I look up then, into his eyes, still the color of a stormy sea, but now I am the calm within them. He is older, the lines on his face a map of our years together, each one a story I cherish. And you? I ask, reaching up to cover his hand with mine. Do you love it? He sits on the arm of my chair, his body a solid, comforting weight against mine. He looks out over our garden, at the wildflowers we planted together, at the peace we built with our own hands. I love the woman who wrote it, he says, his gaze returning to me, full of a quiet, unwavering devotion. I have always loved her. The silence that falls between us is not empty. It is full of answers. It is full of shared mornings and quiet laughter, of battles fought and won, of a love that was not a ruin, but a rebirth. The storm has long since passed. What remains is the steady, certain peace of sunlight, and his hand in mine, chosen, real, and forever. If this forbidden love story made your heart ache, subscribe for more intense, emotional journeys. Let me know you're invested, like this story if you rooted for them against all odds. Comment below, would you have risked it all for a love this consuming? Turn the page for your next obsessio.